I think a short introduction is in order, and emphasis on short. Hello, I'm Red Phoenix, I live blog games, and at the end of each playthrough I make a big finale post where I collect all my thoughts, and this time I decided to make it into a video. Bonus introductions. Yes, my name is spelled the way it's spelled. A shame, really. Yes, live blogging games is just as niche as you think it is. It's basically diet Let's Plays. And yes, I couldn't decide on a name for this. We're both suffering having read it, I assure you. With that, welcome to Full Impressions, where I offer my first impression of the whole game. For the premiere episode, we're talking about Hades. So, right off the bat, I wanted to say something obvious to anyone who's fallen for a roguelike before. Making this video was harder than I thought it should have been. Every time I sat down to work on the script or sort through clips, I just wanted to stop and go play another round or two or for the rest of the night, because surely I did enough work. And that's new for me, for the genre at least. I've never fallen into a roguelike before, or a roguelite for that matter. I mean, I've certainly tried. I tackled Binding of Isaac when that was new and fresh and everyone was talking about it. I tackled Rogue Legacy for much the same reason. I spent a few hours playing FTL because I like spaceships, maybe that'll pull me in. But none of them really drew me into the loop. I would leave each of them feeling like I could see what the appeal was, but also knowing it wasn't really working on me. And so I never played another roguelike ever again. Overdone, you know the lie and weak gag. What actually happened is then Hades exploded onto the scene. All of a sudden, I started hearing that some game named Hades was robbed at the Game of the Year Awards. An award I don't really care about, but if I hear an indie game got robbed, I'm probably going to believe it. At the same time, my dash is swarming with GIFs and even storyboards of Zagreus wiping blood from his hair and what can only be described as perhaps the hottest animation in all of gaming. Oh my god. So, I'm intrigued. It looks gorgeous, people are raving about it, so what if it's a roguelike? Maybe I'll give it another shot, is what I was thinking, until all of a sudden it was gifted upon me by my sister, who thought it was up my alley. Thank you for that, by the way, that was very kind. Hades. It's apt that it's a game of gods, because it made a believer out of me, for the genre at least. I adore it. It's the first roguelike to truly click with me, and every single part of it seems custom built to do just that. From the way progression works, to the way losing works, to the way the story's dispersed, but let's start with the more disconnected thoughts. Countless times while playing, I'd see decisions that stuck out to me, either because they told me, oh, they playtested this baby, or I'd realize that the effect of that decision was partially responsible for me finding this roguelike fun at all. Right out the gate, I have to mention the very first thing I saw when I booted it up. God mode. The second I saw this, it put a big smile on my face, and learning how it exactly works only made me smile harder. While I can't say the game is perfect with accessibility options, a common complaint I saw was that you can't scale the subtitles. That actually affects me. I will say this is a specific option that you don't see often, and I wish every game had it. A truly easy mode for anyone who is struggling but wants to experience the game. Turn on God mode and you get a flat 20% damage resistance. Lose, you get a bit stronger. Lose again, get a bit stronger again. It continues like that for you so that someone who is struggling but determined can still see the end credits. I love that. Now, while I appreciate God mode for what it might do for other players, I didn't really need it for my playthrough. So something I noticed that immediately impressed me because it affected me was the way that boons are handled. Now, boons are the perks you pick up from the various gods. The part that impressed me was that every perk in the game is themed around a specific god, and you can only get them from that god. Meaning, if you're looking for a lightning-themed perk, you're gonna go for a Zeus symbol. Now, each god has enough perks in their deck where you don't exactly know what you're gonna get from any of them, but it allows you to make an informed decision. You go in for a speed boost, you're gonna grab Hermes. You go in for poison damage, you're gonna get Dionysus. A name I can't say quickly, apparently. Anyway, The decision to split the perks up into various themes allows you to make quick decisions. It allows you to play off of intuition. You have an idea of what's going on at all times, even though you might not know what every perk is. Speaking of, every perk in the game tells you exactly what it is. Thank you! Now, this is subjective as heck, but my least favorite part of Binding of Isaac was exactly this. The fact that every time you picked up an item, you did not know what it was. I see the appeal, the mystique, the surprise at finding out what everything is, and that sense of accomplishment when you finally recognize every item in the game. But I dreaded seeing a new item, not recognizing it, and then picking it up and finding that it ruined my synergy entirely and made me lose. In Hades, the fault lies with you, because you're told what everything does. You're even told if it replaces a boon you already have. So a loss because of a bad boon feels like an earned loss, while in Binding I didn't exactly feel that way. But enough about boons. What else? How about the rooms themselves? It's nothing new to add traps to the various rooms in a game structured like this, but I did enjoy the traps themselves, specifically because you could use them against the enemies. You want to knock a skeleton into some lava? Go for it. Want to push some enemies into some spike traps? That's an option. Or probably my favorite one, breaking pillars and raining down rocks on all the enemies' heads. That is way more effective than it has any right to be. Point being, the rooms themselves offer a ton more to the gameplay and really do augment the threats and the options you have. Great stuff. And they're all a part of the overall zones. And just in general, I really dug the zones. From the simple halls of Tartarus to my all-time favorite zone, the Temple of Styx. Tartarus handles a lot of simple threats, spike traps being the most prevalent, but Styx deviates entirely from the previous three zones by giving you a mega shop and a set of rooms you can choose in any order, with the goal of finding one item that lets you proceed. A lucky guess can get you out of Styx in no time, but even then, the prizes on board feel too tantalizing not to consider every single time. And the zone is the only one that deals in poison damage, which is a terrifying obstacle that's handled in a unique way compared to just about every other instance of poison I've ever seen in a game. Every single room generally has a poisonous threat, and always has a cure to that threat. You just have to get to it. It's another case of the rooms being smartly designed to add to the threats and your options. Because you can just avoid getting poisoned, or maybe the cure is in a really good spot and you decide to just go ham and kill all the enemies as fast as possible because you can just drink the cure at any moment. It can alter your gameplay just because they decided to make a cure to poison instead of deciding that once you're poisoned, you're screwed. Since you're able to cure yourself, it becomes part of your gameplay while you're going through Styx. I just really like that. I like how poison is handled as a modification for your game plan instead of as just a mindless dot that enemies happen to have in this zone. But enough about Styx. How about how progression was handled? Now, this is something I actually think is really interesting. There are a few means of progression, but mostly what I want to talk about are the mirror and the weapons. With the mirror, you slowly unlock perks as you play through the game, and then you can power up those perks. But every perk is actually 2 perks, which you choose between. What this ends up meaning is there is a sense of progression where you are constantly getting stronger, but you can't just stack one stat and then win the game every single time. You are forced to pick between having an extra dash or having a dash that, if you time correctly, powers up your attack. You're forced to choose between having a higher attack if you have full health or having more health. The combination of perks are smartly designed to both be appealing, usually for different gameplay styles. But mostly the appeal is you do feel stronger as you continue to play, but you never feel overpowered. It's not possible because you are forced to choose between 2 differing perks. And the weapons kinda handle it this way too. Each weapon has multiple aspects, which are different gameplay tweaks to the weapon, but you can only ever have one aspect turned on. So just like with the perks where you are empowering yourself but you're forced to choose, it's the same. You are empowering yourself but you're forced to choose. But I'll get to talk about the weapons when I talk about the gameplay. Instead, the big one. I want to briefly touch on the various design decisions that led to motivating me to continue playing. Now, these go further beyond the fact that the game's fun to play. There's also the sense of progression from leveling up. There's customizing the House of Hades and improving it. There's the way that New Game Plus is handled with Heat, which has a plethora of options. You get to customize your New Game Plus. That is awesome. But all of that's child's play. There's one big motivator that impressed me, and maybe it's just going to show off that I don't know much about the subgenre. I kind of mentioned as much. The story. I'll talk more about that in its own section, but as a primer, I want to get across how impressed I was with how the story was handled in terms of how it's dished out to the player. The story is paced out over multiple playthroughs, not just a single win. And they even managed to come up with an in-universe explanation for why that might be, and it works. I believe it. They play with the fact that it's a roguelike, that you'll be coming back and playing again, and it's structured in a way where each victory can only allow a single step forward in the narrative. Now, this isn't the first time I've seen beating the game not actually meaning you got the full story, but it's kinda rare. The only examples I can come up with are One Shot, Nier Automata, Undertale. They all played with the idea, but it's still rare, and I haven't really experienced it in a roguelike. Again, that might just be showing my inexperience with the genre. But Hades takes the time to justify why the narrative exists within the gameplay loop of a roguelike, and that's just pretty cool stuff, and it certainly kept me coming back. Winning the game once answers some questions, including questions you had no way of asking, then poses new questions for round 2, and so on, until you finally conclude everything. Oh, and since I'd be a chump if I didn't mention it, the game's gorgeous, the zones are all a delight, getting to the surface put me in awe during my first victory. The character portraits and in-game models are so nice to look at, and I just like it. The music hits. Oh, and there's a smart decision where opening the codex skips to the page of whatever NPC you are currently near. So if you're checking if you've ever given, say, Charon an ambrosia, you can just see. That's one of those things that made me say, oh, they play tested this. I really like that. Now, let's go back to some of the flashier aspects. This game plays like a dream, and I am going to talk a bit too much about that and just explain what the weapons and enemies are. Take with that what you will. Full admittance that I'm going to ramble aside, I really do think the gameplay breaks down to two main things: the enemies and the weapons and how they interact. Starting with the enemies, every single, and I mean every single enemy feels properly realized as if they have a particular role or are demanding a specific counter that another enemy isn't already demanding of you. And they accomplish this without overcomplicating things, because the counter isn't exactly how do I hurt this enemy, it's how do I avoid taking damage if they are involved. At the end of the day, just about every enemy is easily defeated in isolation. The challenge they offer are how do you avoid taking their crossfire while you deal with another enemy, because you're almost always dealing with another enemy. The defensive decisions each enemy asks of you are so contextual and varied based on what weapon you bring or what boons you have, while also being simple enough that if push comes to shove, you don't really need anything in particular to avoid damage from any enemy. Just dash at the right time, or get behind something, or switch targets to the problem enemy if you can interrupt whatever move is giving you trouble. And that's the fun they offer, just by existing on their own. But that's uncommon. Usually they bring friends. And oh boy, the interesting combos they can go for against you, and how that changes up the gameplay is just a thing of beauty. I mean, you got ringers binding you up for a heavy attack from a wretched thug, or void stones encasing others in invulnerability shields so that they can freely torment you while you seek out the crystal. The enemies are given enough tools to be a minor threat on their own, manageable, something you can learn and master. Then their tools become more threatening when different enemies come to assist them, and suddenly you're learning new things about enemies you've fought before. Say you learned how to counter Inferno bombers, just hit them and they can't do anything? Well, toss in a Skull Crusher and suddenly you can't afford to stand in place wailing on them without taking damage from the new threat. So you have to learn a bit more about how those bombs work and how the bombers like to move. Or perhaps that's not a problem for you because of the boons you picked up before encountering this fight, or perhaps your weapon allows you to stunlock the bomber while staying mobile enough to avoid the Crusher. Learning the encounters and then learning what abilities change your approach options is a constant source of enjoyment. I can't properly emphasize just how sick that is and how much I appreciate that. When you move on to bosses, it's a similar story. Bosses have multiple attack options. Some of them are usually contextual, like a get off me move, but what surprised me, reminder that I'm a roguelike newbie, was that after a few runs, the bosses themselves begin to change form to have different movesets. So you learned how to face Meg, the first boss. Well, get ready because there are 3 variants to that boss fight. Have fun learning the other 2 Furies with their twists on Meg's moveset. Don't get me started on the Pact option that adds more techniques to the bosses. That blew my mind to see that they found so many layered options to change how these boss fights play to keep it fresh and challenging. But that's only half of the story for the gameplay. The threats the enemies bring to the table certainly make it interesting, but there's also the matter of the threat Zagreus gets to bring to the table as well. Those damned, it's in hell, I can say that, weapons. The second I got access to more than just the sword, I was convinced that I'd probably hate most of the options. Pessimistic, I know, but I thought I was being realistic. My assumption was that every weapon would play vastly different, and some of the playstyles just wouldn't gel with me. And I was half right. The weapons do play wildly differently. Every weapon has different options, strengths, weaknesses, and to my surprise, every weapon feels great to use. I was really counting on disliking at least one of them, but due to a few things, hammers, aspects, and just each weapon being well put together baseline, that wasn't the case. And because I ended up enjoying all the weapons, I got to thoroughly appreciate the best difference between them. Each weapon has a different means of approaching every single enemy in the game. For example, let's say you're facing a single soul catcher. The soul catcher is mostly harmless in and of itself, as it slowly glides around spawning butterflies which slowly drift towards you and hurt on contact. The catcher itself is the enemy and is the only thing you actually have to kill, but depending on what weapon you have, you'll be doing it a bit differently. The sword might opt to use the AoE of its heavy slam to hit it from a short distance while clearing all the butterflies at the same time, because a normal attack would see them taking too many flies to the face. Likewise, the shield might opt to throw their shield, or even charge through the catcher repeatedly, always making sure to dash through them and not stop on them, as that would mean a face full of bugs. The fist will likely find themselves dashing in and out of danger to land hits because baseline, it lacks a lot of AoE potential. The spear likely won't think twice as they mindlessly press the attack button from a safe distance. Likewise, the gun can shoot or even nuke the catcher from a safe distance, the latter option safely clearing butterflies at the same time. Then, surprisingly, the bow might find a middle ground issue, where they can safely attack from a distance, but their main attack is too focused to clear flies, and their special is useful but not as effective at clearing the flies as the grenade launcher. And guess what? Boons, specifically Daedalus hammers, can completely change these approaches. Boons can add effects to your attacks, causing you to change how you were previously using the weapon by perhaps adding a poison effect to your special attack, which makes you decide to use it more. But hammers? Oh, buddy. Hammers can change an entire run by changing your weapon's base characteristics. The shield's bull rush can be changed into a ranged cannon, making it safer to sit in a corner throwing waves of damage out whenever it's safe, or the sword can change the base 3-hit combo into a single much stronger leaping slash. That might not sound impressive at first, but that leaping slash is strong enough to interrupt attacks, making it much easier to stunlock enemies you probably couldn't before. And if that's still not enough to change how you use the weapon, then just add a ranged piercing fireball attack to the sword, because why not? How's that for changing how you use it? So, as I mentioned, to my surprise, all the weapons felt fantastic to use for me. I mean, the sword is basic out of the box and perhaps the least interesting on paper, but throw a hammer into the equation and it changes up your entire game plan. The spear has insane range, and again, some of those hammer upgrades are wild. The shield has an amazing mix of offense and defense and has a high knockback, which could be really useful for slamming enemies into walls for bonus damage. The bow can do some great single target damage, but what shines to me is that spread shot special attack. Getting up close and personal and hitting one enemy with a dozen arrows never gets old, and can only get better if you grab the hammer buff that makes every subsequent shot do bonus damage if it hits one target. The fists feel so meaty with their special attack, but my favorite part will have to wait just a second. And that gun? That grenade launcher more like. I've had great luck using the bullets themselves, but some of the massive upgrades to that special attack, like the one that makes it huge at the cost of hurting you, you become a walking man-shaped artillery of hell. But really, the icing on the cake is the other means of changing how weapons work. If not hammers, then aspects, which are both the way you upgrade your weapons and each confer a unique effect to the weapon. Things like the shield being able to do this, or the fists getting one of my favorite changes, turning the special attack into a magnetic pull. It's really something that each weapon stands out so well. It reminds me of what I always say about Monster Hunter. Every weapon changes the game entirely. You're playing a different game with different options and threats depending on your choices here. Between how well the enemies are conceived and how many options the weapons give you, the gameplay really struggles to outstay its welcome. I can't stop coming back because every time I come back it's entirely different just based on what I choose to bring, let alone the boons I run into or the enemy combos that come up. But enough rambling about how I enjoy playing the dang thing. What about what the game says? Oh boy, the story. This is where I'll be upfront and say, due to what series this video is in, I'm not offering a deep dive, though there are certainly others with more experience making videos who have done just that. One to come to mind being GC Positive's video, talking on Hades' part in an ongoing conversation Supergiant has been having through its games for years now. Highly recommended. So, I'm gonna try to keep the scope of this video in mind as I talk about the story, if you don't mind. I've already said as much, but I didn't know a roguelike could use the narrative as a motivator through multiple playthroughs. I ended my first playthrough immediately running to the entrance to start again, almost entirely because I wanted more answers, and I didn't know that could happen. Every narrative throughout the game is fed piecemeal to you as you interact with the various characters, provide them gifts, beat the game, or even more specific scenarios like wearing specific keepsakes, weapons, or even boons when talking to a certain character. And it goes beyond just the main story surrounding Hades, Persephone, and Zagreus. Every character's story requires more playthroughs, and as such, prompted me to keep playing. The dispersal of dialogue is key stuff. There is so much that's said in this game, but it's always in short, more natural bursts instead of, I don't know, abusing the monologue. Not to say either is superior, just that they knew which would serve their game better. And this means on run 20, you're still hearing new things and aren't even a step into finishing half the narratives on offer. Oh, and the moment Achilles' keepsake procced extra dialogue and progressed the story for himself and Patroclus, something I hadn't considered as a means of revealing more story? Exceptional. Hades did a wonderful job of managing its hooks, both for the main story and for the side narratives. From the second the game starts, it offers questions that beg to be answered, and become the basis for the motivation you have to beat it for that first time. Why is Zagreus trying to escape the underworld? Why are the gods helping? What is the relationship between Hades and Zagreus like? Is that why he's leaving? Who are these other gods in the underworld? Then you lose a few times, you see a flashback, you find out about Persephone, and it opens more questions related to her and Hades. Why is Hades hiding that Persephone's your mother? Why did she leave? Why is he keeping us from her? Then you finally get to face Hades, and ask why he's stopping you, and you find Persephone, and you learn more, only to die of natural causes, which opens more questions. My point being that at all points in the narrative, the game makes sure that you are asking something, and that something has meat on its bones and isn't just, what's next? Take an ongoing question that lasts multiple cycles of beating the game. Why is Hades trying to stop you from talking to Persephone, even after you best him once? That one question can dig at you with possibilities. Does he hate her? What does she know that he doesn't want to find out? Was it the other way around? Does he know something? If she knows something, why is there something? And so on. The game is constantly telling you that answers are around the corner, but you have to work for them. Even more than that basis, my favorite motivator is probably Hades himself, the guy, the god. Every time you get to the surface, you get to speak to him in a way he never allows down in the house. He reveals things more candidly. In a way, he shows Zagreus more respect on the surface for having come so far, as that is the only time he'll humor the idea of answering any of Zagreus' questions. Also, it's always a blast when these two snarky bitches go at it.
Father, what happened to the lounge? The only place for anyone to have a little fun around here, and you seal it shut.
Oh, I had little choice about that, boy. You see, after you fled the first time, Cerberus, why, he was very much upset. Utterly tore the place to shreds. It's now under repair. All thanks to you.
You're really blaming me for not minding the dog while I was out and while you all were here.
I lay the blame entirely upon you, yes. Who else? It's fortunate that Cerberus has calmed himself since then. Come to his senses, I should say. May you yet come to yours.
It's the only time Zagreus and Hades really talk. Not kindly, not with much care, as both are in opposition, but it's something. And since Hades is the only one who can answer most of the questions that plague the player in Zagreus, meeting him on the surface became one of my favorite parts. And it only became even better if you actually beat him, since then you'd get to speak to Persephone, who is a delight, and pulling information with her always leaves me feeling more enlightened once I get back to the house. As the story progresses, it somehow becomes more interesting with each cycle. Questions become more complicated, my view on the characters become more nuanced. Hades himself goes from a spiteful and angry father stifling his son, to a complex figure harboring a secret for the safety of others and trying to protect his son and ex-lover through force. It doesn't undo the hurt brought on, but it makes it more interesting, and in a way offers hope that things can be made better. The way Hades, or the god again, is handled really impressed me. The themes he harbors are heavy, and my opinion of them evolved over time. The broken household, the disrespect, the overbearing nature, the lies. It's quite something is all. Tackling these questions motivated me to continue forward the same way it motivated Zagreus, which is just some really nice cohesion and harmony between our motives. And as you seek out the answers Zagreus wants, you begin to realize more about why Hades wants to keep you from meeting Persephone, and more about the potential calamity that could rise between Olympus and the underworld if he failed, and that's enough of that. To lighten things up slightly, the characters are some of the most fun and eclectic I've seen in a while. The writing is witty and fun, but more important than any of that, the voice acting in this game is in a league of its own. Listening to the performances for any of the gods or shades will tell you all you need to know about them right away. From Hades' booming, stern-to-a-fault voice, to the amazing cadence that Meg carries, the unbelievably gratuitous ego that Theseus has. What a prick. And who could hear a single line from Dusa and not immediately fall in love?
Oh, the prince himself. You want to talk to me? Me? Oh, wow. Oh, wow.
I just wanted to say, don't bother picking up my room today. I'm headed out for a while.
I have to clean the rafters.
Thanks for all your hard work.
And it's at this point I have to stop myself, because this is about as far as I've gotten. Yeah, a bit preemptive to make a video and all that, potentially, but hear me out. I mentioned the whole live blog niche hobby nonsense, yes? Well, Some games don't live blog all too well, and if that's the case, I bring them to a close as far as the blog is concerned. And Hades? Well, all those motivators to dive back into the underworld, the dispersed story, the exciting gameplay, the sense of growth, it doesn't really feel all that hot to blog is all. I mean, consider this. You do 5 runs and lose each time. Now, chances are you're having fun and can say, I talked with these characters, got some nectar, it was pretty worth it. But try to interrupt that vibe and find something to post. That's a bit of a hassle. The same things that make the gameplay loop so enticing also make it a bit less fun to blog about, for me at least. So that's why. My god, I hate the word blog, and I've said it way too many times in this section. Anyway, Hades is, already, with only a handful of successful runs and a little over a day of playtime, one of my favorite games. And I can't say that happens all too often. So clearly I plan to continue playing, but this video will remain as a snapshot of my thoughts on the game. I'm stoked to get back into the underworld after finishing this video and break out all over again. So many characters left unfulfilled, so many questions still hazy and unanswered. So many sick builds to stumble onto with some lucky boons. I really want to go play Hades right now. I imagine you can relate, so let's close this out and go do that. Hey! I just wanted to thank you for watching this nonsense to the end. Since you've listened to me ramble about Hades for so long, why not do so yourself down in the comments? I'm curious if anyone else wasn't a fan of roguelikes before trying this one, or what weapons were your favorite. If you enjoyed this video, then feel free to subscribe for the next to nothing that actually does for you in modern YouTube. Like the video, dislike it. Okay, you should probably like it again. Nice. If you would like to see more thoughts on the game showcased today, or any of the many other games I've played in the past or am currently playing, then you can check the description for a link to the blog where I post all that. There's that word again. If you want to convince me to actually use Twitter, then you can follow that as well, @RedPhoenix, and I think that about does it. Have a good one.